Hi everyone, welcome as our session will begin now. Professor Raihan Ismail, His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al-Thani, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies, University of Oxford, Mr. Daniel Rahman, CEO of Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute ASLI. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to this month's edition of the ASLI Diplomatic Dynamics series with the topic Faith, Power and Fire, Understanding the Middle East in an Age of Conflict. I am Abkari, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. For everyone's information, the Diplomatic Dynamics series is ASEAN's knowledge platform aimed at fostering discussions on the latest diplomatic issues within ASEAN, Malaysia, and around the globe. The initiative brings together diplomatic figures, policymakers, researchers, and members of the public to engage in meaningful conversations on global challenges, regional cooperation, as well as ASEAN's role in international diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event will begin with an opening remark by the CEO of ASLI, Mr. Daniel Rahman, followed by a presentation from Professor Raihan Ismail, and a moderated Q&A session with Anas Hayyan. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Daniel Rahman, CEO of ASLI, to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you, Abkari. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you very much for coming to our event today. Some of you had texted me and said it's been a while since we held our last Diplomatic Dynamics. Just to share, ASLI has had a very busy year. We are very much in the throngs and thick of doing a lot of capacity building work for the civil service and the private sector. We've launched several research projects on green industrial policy, looking at endowment and charities reform in Malaysia, as well as we're going to kick off one hopefully soon on Malaysia as a middle power. So this talk today by my good friend Prof. Raihan is part of that effort in moving in that direction, highlighting this so that if anyone might be working on this or might be interested to collaborate, feel free to drop us a line or to talk to us after this. There's of course Abkari, Anas will be moderating, and my team at the back. In addition to that, we're also very humbled to welcome you. The engagements with the diplomatic community and conversations on geopolitics is very timely. In the final week of Ramadan, I had the privilege of meeting the new Palestinian ambassador to Malaysia, Mr. Jihad, and he shared very interesting insights about what is going on in the Middle East, perspectives that they have, and also his hope. His hope and you could say his gratitude to Malaysia for being a supporter of the cause, but also acknowledging the complications that are there as well. This first edition for this year, it comes at a very consequential moment. I am following the issue very closely, listening to the likes of Professor Roy Casagranda. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or heard him online, Raihan. Of course, I also, being a semi-media practitioner, will listen to the likes of Tucker Carlson, who seems to have turned the table a little bit about his position. You know, it's one of those people who you're like, I can't believe I agree with this person. Of course, Mehdi Hassan, the likes, and your usual suspects. One of my current favorite podcasts is on the Middle East Eye, but also something called The Thinking Muslim, if any of you have watched this before. But I also occasionally, if not more often than not, listen to Fox News because I sometimes need a little bit of a different perspective in life. So do most of us. That said, it is our great privilege to welcome Professor Raihan, a dear friend who was my senior in university, not by much. And we used to debate together. So she gave me a lot of guidance as part of the International Islamic University Malaysia Debate Club. Many years on, now she is with the University of Oxford, and I also happen to be a very fortunate alumni of that university. For today's conversation, she will be exploring or taking us on a journey to better understand faith, power, and fire. I suppose that's a reference to the ongoings there. And in order to understand the Middle East in an age of conflict, of course, some of the questions, if you listen to commentary, is about, wow, Iran is holding strong. It's one of the oldest civilizations around. But hey, in Malaysia, they are Shia. What about, I thought we are Sunnis. And what does all of that mean in the larger scheme of things? Prof. Raihan is one of the most distinguished chairs in Islamic studies in the world today, a leading scholar in political Islam, Gulf politics, and Muslim societies, and someone whose work has shaped how policymakers, academics, and practitioners understand the modern Muslim world. And as a fellow Malaysian, we are especially proud to have her speaker today. Of course, everybody is asking me, she Malaysian? She Malaysian? So I will let Prof. Raihan dispel that with some logat Kedah later on. Maybe if we are lucky enough. And I think, inshallah, ultimately, the purpose of today is about expanding our knowledge and our insights on the issues. I trust all of us here today are here with a curiosity to understand not just what's happening in the news as being reported, but from the perspective of a scholar who has not only deep dived the books, but also visited various nations in the Middle East to understand what's happening. Of course, we have a very capable moderator today. I usually moderate, but today I yield to my senior analyst, Anas Haya. Let's give him a round of applause. Very many interesting questions, I'm sure. So, of course, let's give Prof. Raihan a round of applause. Forgot to clap for our speaker as well. And last and foremost, before I hand over the floor, thank you again for being here. You're encouraged to take photos. At this point, it is, I wouldn't say Chatham House rules because Raihan's the only one who's speaking. But treat the discourse with respect in that regard. And of course, feel free to think of questions. I think that's going to be the most interesting part here as well. We've got a mixture of members of audience. I see people from the sciences, from the arts, government officials, scholars, academics, students, diplomatic communities, and the likes. And without further ado, once again, welcome. Thank you very much. I'll pass the floor back to Abkari. Assalamu alaikum, and let's enjoy the session, inshallah.
Thank you, Mr. Danny Rahman, for the welcoming remarks. So before we move on to the next session, allow me to briefly introduce our speaker today. Professor Raihan Ismail is His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al-Thani, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at the University of Oxford, where she convenes the Contemporary Islamic Studies program at the Middle East Center, St. Anthony's College. Her work focuses on political Islam, intra-Muslim relations, and the intersection of religion and politics in the modern Middle East. Prior to joining Oxford, she was based at the Australian National University and is a recipient of the Max Crawford Medal from the Australian Academy of the Humanities for Outstanding Early Career Achievement, where she was also elected a corresponding fellow in 2024. She has held prestigious fellowships, including the Australian Research Council (TECRA) Fellowship and the Goldman Faculty Leave Fellowship at the Brandeis University, and has advised various Australian government agencies on political Islam and regional dynamics. A widely recognized commentator, she has appeared on international platforms such as BBC World and Voice of America, and is the award-winning author of Rethinking Salafism, which received the UK's Muslim World Book Award in 2024. Her extensive academic, policy, and media experience positions her as a leading voice in understanding Islam and contemporary Middle East politics. With that, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Raihan Ismail.
Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. Sometimes when you have a very kind of generous introduction like that, there's a lot of pressure because you're wondering, oh dear, there's so much pressure in terms of what you have and what you can share with others. But I'm very, very grateful to be here today. I've known Daniel since my undergraduate years, and we've had so much fun together. And it's always good to be back here, to be with all of you as well. And today, yes, and I'm from Kedah, by the way. I'm boleh cakap Kedah, keluar Kedah, logat Kedah, semua boleh keluar. I'm from Kedah, and I left Malaysia 20 years ago. So it's very, very. I feel very grateful to be back. Today, I think the topic is again, we're looking at what's happening in the region, and it is very difficult to try and summarize what's happening in the region because there's just so many moving parts and there's so many actors kind of participating in the conflict in the region. what I'm hoping to do, basically two things, and I think if we have time, we can start exploring other topics as well. So the first thing I would like to do is really trying to understand trends and what is happening in the region, particularly implications for GCC states, because clearly GCC states are being hammered by Iran. Countries like Iraq, for example, Iraq is actually the only country that's being hammered by both the US, Israel, and also by Iran because of the Iraqi militias inside Iran and also the retaliation from the US government as well as Israel. So trying to understand that. And then the second part of the talk, I'm hoping to look at religion, looking at the concept of the Ummah. Is the Ummah dead? Because clearly I have students at Oxford, when we talk, I teach an option on modern Islamic thought. And we have, we start talking about the Ummah, what it really means. And clearly when it comes to the Ummah, is the Ummah dead? And that's one of the questions that my students often ask. And the second part, of that, and then we will be looking at the Sunni-Shia divide as well in trying to understand Saudi-Iranian relations and trying to understand the dynamics within the region. So let me begin. Of course, when we talk about October the 7th, it has permanently kind of altered regional dynamics and political landscape of the Middle East. It's very difficult to say that the region looks the same, but that's always normal. Because when we talk about regional changes, that happens from time to time. So something happens, it changes the dynamics, and then something else happens, it changes the dynamics. But clearly, when it comes to October the 7th, it has changed the dynamics in the region. Prior to October the 7th, several regional powers had either normalized relations with Israel or were on the verge of doing so. So countries such as the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain signed the Abraham Accords, and formally recognizing Israel and embarking on bilateral relations that included intelligence sharing, security arrangements, and other arrangements agreements as well. So you have tourists from Israel traveling to Morocco, and Moroccan tourists who traveled to Israel as well as part of that arrangement. I must say that there are more Israeli tourists traveling to Morocco than Moroccan tourists traveling to Israel. Because clearly public opinion hasn't really shifted in the context of Morocco, and the same with the UAE. So you have Israeli tourists traveling to the UAE, all as part of the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia too. We were talking about Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel, and they appeared so close to normalizing relations with Israel, although this process remained incomplete, and October the 7th happened. And then we know, we're aware of how Israel responded to October the 7th. And following the devastating war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, and the scale of civilian suffering, alongside continued largely unconditional US support across administrations, not just Biden, and then later you have Trump. And that has also significantly reshaped regional calculations and the broader regional order. And these developments have not only affected regional dynamics, but also influenced global perceptions and political positioning. So we're not talking about countries in the Middle East alone. We're talking about Western institutions. We're talking about countries in the West as well. And what has unfolded has exposed institutions across Europe and the United States. And countries such as Australia as well have been exposed for the double standards and hypocrisy. In terms of how the institutions actually dealt with Israel's aggressions in the region, particularly in the context of Gaza. And here, I have a student from Oxford, Dayini, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. So, you're familiar with the encampment at the University of Oxford, and you're also part of the encampment. Is that all right for me to say? Malaysia is pretty safe, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah. Because I can imagine, because I do have students who go back to Norway or go back to America, and to be part of the encampment can actually be quite problematic for employment prospects. But again, we're looking at how difficult it was in terms of trying to understand how institutions work in the West, particularly when we discuss human rights, when we discuss a rules-based order. And clearly, from media reporting to political discourse, from government departments to educational institutions, the notion of a rules-based order and the image of institutional civility have been widely questioned as well. So we're not just talking about the alterations of regional dynamics in the Middle East, but we're also talking about the changes taking place in Europe, in America, as well as other countries such as Australia. And the failure of the international community to effectively restrain or hold Israel accountable has further emboldened its regional posture, including military actions in Gaza, in countries such as Lebanon, in Yemen, in Syria. And these developments have contributed to an increasingly volatile regional environment. So we're looking at a region that continues to be affected by what's happening in the region, particularly with Israeli aggressions. The escalation involving Iran in the last, how many days now? 30, more than a month. Yeah. So clearly, involving Iran represents another attempt to reshape regional dynamics. And this is the thing, analysts have actually talked about this from Israel's strategic perspective. A weakened Iran, is actually quite good for Israel's regional ambitions, because a weak Iran is a country that cannot challenge Israel's regional dominance, and that would be a favorable outcome. And I think I'm not the only one who's making this observation. Clearly, analysts have made these observations as well, and that's why it's kind of interesting to see the U.S. having. I wouldn't say Donald Trump knows what he's doing, because clearly we're really unsure about his goals. But when it comes to Israel, the main aim, or at least what we think the main aim is to really weaken Iran as a power. I think Naftali Bennett actually mentioned Turkey as another problematic country. The narrative is also quite scary, because after Iran, the most powerful country in the region would be Turkey. And here you have kind of slowly Israel's also targeting Turkey, and the discourse is becoming quite regressive as well in terms of addressing Turkey and Turkey's influence in the region. At the moment, and more broadly, prolonged instability in Iran serves this objective. Of course, are we talking about regime change, or are we talking about weak Iran? So for some, regime change is something that Donald Trump propagates, while others say that for the Israelis, it doesn't really matter whether you have regime change in Iran, as long as you have a country that is weak, a country that is constantly struggling, a country that continues to deal with instability domestically and regionally. And at the same time, the conflict has had significant implications for Gulf countries. And I think when it comes to the GCC states, or states within the GCC, they have long relied on perceptions of stability and security. People travel to Dubai. People have fun in Dubai. People realize that Dubai is stable, Dubai is safe, Abu Dhabi is the same, Doha is the same, Kuwait City is the same. Even with the Saudis, with the countries opening up, people are traveling to Al-Ula, to Riyadh, to Jeddah. And these countries rely on the perception that it is safe, despite the fact that you're dealing with Iran, or you're dealing with Gaza, you're dealing with Lebanon. You can always rely on the safety and security provided by these countries. And it's great for investment. And these countries are also looking to diversify their economies, moving away from oil, not being too reliant on oil. And this has been an effort put forward by countries like GCC countries. And it raises an important question. Or it raises important questions regarding regional alignments, because countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar are being compelled to reassess their security arrangements. Why is that the case? Because they were always reliant on American security guarantees. And now things have changed. Can America provide security to these countries? With American bases in these countries, one would think they would be safe. But Iran shattered that perception that these countries are actually safe, or it is safe to host American bases there. And recent and high-profile engagements with the US, including presidential visits, have not, kind of removed these concerns. And clearly, doubts have emerged regarding the reliability of American security guarantees, particularly when US presence may itself become a source of risk. And I think one would say it was when Israel attacked Qatar and tried to assassinate the leader of Hamas in Qatar, in Doha. This was a few months ago before the current war has started. And I remember watching Al Jazeera, both in Arabic and English, but also watching Al Arabiya, watching Emirati news media outlets. They were concerned about the fact that Israel was able to attack Qatar and get away with it. It's okay to attack Iran. So I wouldn't say it's okay, but that's not inconceivable. But to attack Qatar, to attack Doha, that really shattered and, kind of sent a wave shock through, that reverberated across the region. That here you have Israel being able to do that, and with the American support as well as American acknowledgement. To what extent the Americans were aware, some said that they found out as Israel started attacking Qatar. They didn't know about it beforehand, while others questioned whether or not America actually had information about the impending attack that time. So there were two key shifts evidence. Two key shifts are evident. One, a growing perception that U.S. security guarantees may be insufficient to ensure protection. And this concern is increasingly discussed, as I've mentioned earlier, in policy circles, in media outlets, and public discourse across the region. And second, I would say divergent positions have also emerged within the region. So we're talking about GCC countries. We're not looking at a unified position when we talk about GCC countries. Countries such as Oman and Qatar have preferred a diplomatic approach in dealing with Iran. Oman has consistently called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to dialogue, while Qatar has actively supported US-Iran negotiations hosted in Muscat. The UAE, by contrast, has adopted a considerably firmer stance following the targeting of its infrastructure and civilian sites by, I think, over 1,400 Iranian ballistic missiles and drones. But having said that, while the UAE has officially ruled out direct participation in the war and rejected offensive military action, it has also simultaneously asserted its right to take all necessary measures to safeguard its sovereignty. So conflicting views here when it comes to where the UAE actually stands. And it really does leave the precise nature of its response deliberately ambiguous. And I think you're not really sure, are they going to enter the war? Is Trump going to be able to convince them to participate in the attacks against Iran? And I would say it's the same with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, there are leaks saying that the Saudis are quite happy with how the Americans are responding against Iran. But there are also reports suggesting that the Saudis never said anything like that. And this has always been part of Saudi Arabia's diplomacy or foreign policy. Scholars who work on Saudi Arabia classify this as strategic silence. So even with the Abraham Accords, normalization with Israel, are they going to normalize? Are they not going to normalize? On the one hand, you hear that they're so close to normalizing. On the other hand, you hear that the Saudis are never that interested in normalizing. So I think they do exercise strategic silence, and often they wait and see how others have responded to matters before they actually respond to it themselves. And I think in the case of Gaza and normalization with Israel, it was very clever of them to wait. And the reason being, normalizing with Israel while the country is conducting, genocide on the people of Palestine was actually not a great idea or not a great look for a country like Saudi Arabia. So I think in that way, you can tell that the Saudis and their strategic silence has actually worked in their favor. So at the moment, I wouldn't be so confident to say, at least from my perspective, wouldn't be so confident to say that the Saudis are fully on board with the Americans and they're going to enter the conflict. But at the same time, I also would not rule it out because I think it's part of their strategies just to wait and see. Having said that, there's a deep anger across the Gulf. These countries perceive themselves as having been unfairly targeted by Iran, particularly Oman and Qatar, whose long-standing neutral and mediating role did not shield it from attack. In response, you can see Gulf states moved swiftly at the international level, introducing 2 resolutions at the United Nations. The first resolution, 2817, that was introduced in March 2026, the resolution condemned Iran's egregious, egregious attacks against Gulf neighbors, and its obstruction of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab. And this passed 13-2 with China and Russia abstaining. The second was tabled shortly, focused on securing global shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, notably permitting only defensive measures and explicitly ruling out offensive military escalation. So clearly, these countries are quite concerned and quite angry about being targeted by Iran, despite the fact that if you're listening to their analysts, they're quite sympathetic to Iran. Not because they agree with Iran, but they kind of, what else are they going to do? And this is, what policy makers in Oman, in Qatar, and also in Saudi Arabia have actually said. We get what they're trying to do, but we're still very annoyed that we're being targeted. Other countries in the region are also suffering the consequences of the global energy crisis. Egypt, for instance, faces declining tourism revenues and continued difficulty in improving its economic position. It remains reliant on financial support and investment from Gulf states. And yet these countries are increasingly unable to fill commitments as their priorities shift. I know a colleague of mine who's working on Egypt, and he said that they're just waiting for the Emiratis to give them money because the Emiratis have promised that they're going to invest in some of the industries in Egypt, and they're not even sure whether that's going to happen now. And I think because clearly these countries have had to rearrange their priorities. So Iraq is another country that has been also severely affected by the war. As I've mentioned earlier, it is uniquely positioned as a site of overlapping conflict dynamics. On the one hand, the country hosts military, US military assets, and they've been targeted by Hashd al-Sha'bi, Iranian drones and Iranian missiles. On the other hand, it is also home to Shia militias aligned with Iran, and they're very loyal to Iran. And they've also launched attacks on US assets. So in retaliation, the US and at times Israel has conducted strikes on Iraqi territory. And these exchanges have also resulted in casualties in recent weeks and have significantly undermined Iraq's territorial integrity. As I've said earlier, when we are looking at Israel benefiting from these dynamics, I think Lebanon is something that we have to think about as well when we are looking at what's happening in the region. While international attention is kind of focused on US-Iran tensions, Israel has intensified its operations in Lebanon, and it wants to establish greater control in the south and advancing its strategic objectives in the region. Its large-scale bombing campaign, justified in terms of disarming Hezbollah, has resulted in significant casualties and displacement, particularly in the south of Lebanon, because these are Shiite areas. You have Shiite villages in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah stronghold. But I wouldn't just say that these people are Hezbollah supporters, not necessarily, because you have other Shia factions as well in Lebanon. But many of them have fled and they are now displaced in other parts of Lebanon. So they've left the south. Now many of them are in Beirut. So southern Beirut, again, is also known to be a Hezbollah stronghold. It has been bombed. There's a massive campaign against southern Beirut. So those who live in southern Beirut have also kind of left to other parts of Lebanon. I think Lebanon is dealing with sectarian tensions as well, political tensions, economic problems, and Israel is clearly taking advantage of what's happening in Lebanon. Many would argue that the south will now be occupied by Israeli soldiers, because clearly the main goal is to recapture southern Lebanon, because that is also part of Israel's greater ambitions. And what's interesting is that they say it blatantly. So when we talk about Israel's grand ambitions in the region, we're not talking about a country that is timid or a country that conceals its grand ambitions in the region. They say it blatantly in media discussions. The politicians talk about it. The Knesset talks about these grand ambitions, and yet for some reason we're still not hearing these Israeli visions being articulated in Western media outlets or in Western institutions where they take it seriously that here you have an expansionist actor that will violate human rights as well as international law in pursuing what it wants to pursue. But clearly, Israel does not shy away from making these comments. In the West Bank, something that we have to keep an eye on as well, a process of a de facto annexation has been underway for years, but has recently accelerated at an unprecedented pace. And you see settler violence. You're seeing even the government now engaging in practices that would facilitate the annexation of the West Bank. What I would say is that it will take considerable time for the region to recover from this war. The longer it persists, the more profound and lasting its structural consequences will be. When we talk about GCC states, now GCC states do not want to pursue, aggression. They talk about diplomatic solutions to deal with Iran. I know Qatar in particular said that Iran is here to stay. It is important for us to learn to live with Iran. It is important for us to make sure that we are able to cooperate with our neighbor. But the longer this lasts, the harder it is for the situation to remain stable. And that's why analysts in the region are saying that we have to find a solution to actually end this war. We're not talking about the global energy crisis alone. We're also talking about regional stability that will continue to impact the region in the long term. So the second part of this kind of talk, I want to, because Daniel asked me to discuss religion, to discuss how might we understand these developments from the perspective of religion. And I will kind of focus on two concepts, perhaps. One, the Ummah, and second, to look at Sunni-Shia relations. I mean, can we really explain the situation in the region from the perspective of the Sunni-Shia relations or Sunni-Shia divide? What I would say, following particularly when we look at the Ummah, following the devastation, many have asked, as I've mentioned earlier, whether the Ummah is effectively dead, as the Muslim world appears unable to respond in a unified and decisive manner. You see people complaining, taking to the streets, saying that their rulers are impotent, their rulers haven't done anything, their rulers are lackeys. So I was in Morocco and attended a pro-Palestine protest in Morocco. Being in Baghdad, it was the same. You see posters everywhere. Iraq is a little bit different because Iraq has always been part of the resistance movement. So they don't feel that concerned about their government. But countries like Morocco, for example, because they've normalized relations with Israel and they have very strong security arrangements with Israel. And I think this is to, basically Israel recognize Morocco's claim over Western Sahara, and therefore that strengthened Morocco-Israel relations. And when we talk about their security arrangements, we're talking about very strong security arrangements in terms of intelligence sharing, as well as weapons manufacturing and economic relations as well. So here we're looking at, the concept of the Ummah, people questioning whether or not the Ummah exists. My PhD supervisor, James Piscatori, wrote a book on the Ummah, and I kind of like the way he frames the understanding of the concept. And he suggests that the Ummah can be understood as being thin at times and thick at times. So a thin Ummah refers to a loosely connected community bound by shared faith, resembling an interstate society and transnational networks that foster cultural and symbolic connections. Pilgrimage, that's part of what the Ummah would symbolize. Coming together, sharing ideas, that's also part of the Ummah. Solidarity with the Palestinians, donations. that you give to Palestinians, sponsoring Bosnian students in the 1990s. I remember Bosnian students being given scholarships to come to Malaysia. So that's all part of the idea of the ummah, the abstract concept of the ummah. So in that case, the ummah is thin. In this sense, the ummah functions as a moral and symbolic bond without requiring deep political unity or institutional enforcement. So we don't have to be unified, but the ummah does exist, but it's thin. It is a thick ummah, on the other hand, by contrast, represents a maximal and substantive conception. So it is an exclusive and universal community making strong claims about identity, making strong claims about solidarity and obligation. And this conception kind of often entails expectations of active political and at times military mobilization in defense of Muslim interests globally. And that is something that we don't have. We don't have the OIC mobilizing militarily to protect the Palestinians in Gaza or the West Bank. In the present moment, clearly the ummah appears thin. There is widespread moral solidarity, financial support, and connection through religious networks such as pilgrimage, but these do not translate into unified political or military action, largely due to structural as well as political limitations and constraints. So the second point that perhaps I now end with this is intra-Muslim relations and the Sunni-Shia question. This is actually my favorite topic because this is my PhD actually. When we talk about the Sunni-Shia relations, it is, or divide, it's not new. However, its intensification became particularly pronounced following the 1979 Iranian Islamic Revolution. So the revolution was grounded in Shia principles, but was also driven by a broader anti-imperial and anti-colonial efforts. Ayatollah Khomeini, for example, challenged the legitimacy of Arab rulers, established Arab rulers, including those in Saudi Arabia, and he wanted to export a thawra beyond Iran, so wanted to export the revolution beyond Iran. And this alarmed many governments in the region. Shia communities in Saudi Arabia, particularly in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, as well as Bahrain, as well as Kuwait, responded to Ayatollah Khomeini's call. And they were subsequently suppressed by ruling authorities. So they took to the streets, they challenged the ruling families in the region, and clearly that's why countries like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait, they're quite nervous about Iran's interventions in the region. So they treated Iran with trepidation and continue to treat Iran with trepidation. And at the same time, the revolutionary message initially had cross-sectarian appeal. So the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, for example, celebrated the Iranian Revolution because they felt that finally we have an Islamic revolution. Finally, this is something that will actually kind of challenge imperial powers. And, the Iranian Revolution was also popular in some parts of the Muslim world. Various Islamic movements, even in South Asia, expressed support for the revolution. I remember my father, he was a school teacher, and I say this a lot when people ask me why is it, my first book in particular, why is it that I wanted to work on Shiism and understanding Shiism. We lived in Penang, and my father was a school teacher, and he, taught Sharia, and they have workshops for school teachers in Malaysia. So school teachers, I'm sure you're very familiar with the school teachers who would go and attend workshops. And he went to Kelantan for a workshop, and this was in the 80s. And there were some Saudi scholars who were actually providing training to school teachers in Malaysia. And my father said that these Saudi scholars talked about the Iranian Revolution, and they said that you have to be very careful because the Iranian Revolution is not an Islamic revolution. Do not be deceived. And coming back, he told us, and I remember, hearing him having that conversation with my mother, saying that, I didn't know that the Iranian Revolution is actually not an Islamic revolution. These are Shia, they are deviant, and they're removed from Islam. So I think that kind of sparked my interest. And I I wanted to look for a PhD topic, and I had a conversation with James Piscatori, and then he said to me that, why don't you work on this topic? And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. That's something that I've always wanted to know more about, because living in Malaysia, we're not exposed to Shia theology or Shia political thought at all. But having said that, clearly there is that anti-Shia narrative propagated by Saudi Arabia as well. And the reason is very clear, because Ayatollah Khomeini challenged the legitimacy of the Saudi ruling family, and more importantly, incited Shia inside of Saudi Arabia to rebel against the ruling family. And if you look at the Saudi Arabia's eastern province, that is the oil-rich region. So this is Mantiqa Sharqiyya in Saudi Arabia. When you look at Iran, so this is why many were concerned about Iranian interventions in the region. Iran also began providing financial and political backing to non-state actors such as Hezbollah, and this is since the early 1980s, and Iran also supported Hamas since the early 1990s, further embedding itself in regional politics. So these developments strained Iran's relations with several regional states. Its support for the Syrian regime after 2011 deepened sectarian tensions, particularly among Sunni majority countries. And this reinforced the perception that Iran prioritized Shia actors at the expense of Sunni populations. Because 2011, we're looking at the Arab uprisings, they toppled Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, toppled Ben Ali in Tunisia, and in Syria, Sunni majority Syrians in particular. I wouldn't say it was a sectarian issue, but clearly we're looking at Syria, which is a Sunni majority country. They took to the streets, and this is when Iran intervened in support of the regime. Hezbollah also intervened in support of the regime. And that altered the dynamics as well when it comes to Sunni-Shia relations, because many felt betrayed by Hezbollah's intervention, many felt betrayed by Iran's intervention. Before that, Hezbollah enjoyed a good reputation in the region. And that's because Hezbollah defeated Israel in 2006. Remember the 2006 war with Israel. And people celebrated Hezbollah's victory. People took to the streets to celebrate Hassan Nasrallah's victory. But 2012 changed the dynamics, because many felt betrayed by Iran and Hezbollah's support for Bashar al-Assad's regime. Maybe I can continue with that a little bit. I get too excited about this. So one of the reasons, it's more complex than this, because there is a shrine in Damascus. It's called the Sayyida Zainab Shrine. Sayyida Zainab was Hussein's sister. So Hussein was the Shia Imam, so the fourth Imam, the Prophet's grandson, who was massacred at Karbala in Iraq. And for the Shia, it's so important to actually commemorate and remember the martyrdom of Hussein, because it was seen as unjust. And therefore, Sayyida Zainab, she survived the massacre, and she was brought to Damascus, and she valiantly fought to save the lives of Hussein's ailing son, the only son who survived the massacre at Karbala. And as a result, there was a big shrine in Damascus for Sayyida Zainab. And this shrine is so important for Shia believers. Iran invested so much money to build this shrine, to refurbish this shrine in the 1990s. There's a reason I'm telling this story. For Hezbollah, the reason they claim why they supported Bashar al-Assad is because they wanted to protect this shrine. So this shrine was attacked by so-called jihadis, and therefore Hezbollah announced that it was going to enter the conflict to protect the shrine. So it's not just as simple that we support Bashar al-Assad, but there's also a religious element to why Hezbollah decided to enter the conflict, mainly to protect Sayyida Zainab shrine. So in the south, if you go to southern Lebanon, you can see during this time posters of martyrs from southern Lebanon. These are Hezbollah fighters who fought to protect Sayyida Zainab shrine. So there is again that religious element to why Hezbollah participated in the Syrian civil war. So again, when we look at Hamas, so here it further destabilizes the narrative, because Hamas is a Sunni political movement, and yet Hamas had or enjoyed the support of Iran and enjoyed the support of Hezbollah as well as other actors within the resistance movement. During this time, particularly in 2012, Hamas relocated its political office from Damascus to Doha in early 2012, partly in response to its support for the Syrian opposition, because Hamas felt that we cannot justify supporting a tyrannical regime like Bashar al-Assad's regime, and therefore they decided that they're going to withdraw from Damascus and they were relocated to Doha. But having said that, Doha gets hammered a lot for hosting Hamas delegations and opening up an office in Doha. But it must be noted, the United States approached Qatar to host Hamas in order to maintain diplomatic channels. So the Qataris always talk about this, is that we didn't even invite Hamas to come to Doha. It was actually the Americans who approached us, who wanted us to open an office so that they can maintain that diplomatic channels. And yet, the Qataris get hammered a lot for having Hamas office and delegations in Qatar. This change under the leadership of Yahya Sinwar, so Hamas moved closer again to Iran. And this shift reflects changing regional dynamics, including growing frustration with Sunni Arab governments, particularly their efforts to normalize with Israel and the repression of Islamist political movements. So under Yahya Sinwar, he felt that we have to go back and improve relations with Iran because Iran remains committed to the Palestinian cause. And if you're looking at Saudi Arabia, you're looking at the UAE, they're talking about normalizing relations with Israel at the expense of the Palestinian cause. So when we talk about Sunni-Shia contestation, it is both political and theological, but it is often misunderstood. So many polemical narratives misrepresent Shiism as inherently deviant, framing theological differences in ways that exacerbate tensions and divisions. In practice, lived realities are often more nuanced and I would say more complex. In countries such as Iraq, for example, where Sunnis and Shia communities coexist, there's frequently a more grounded and reciprocal understanding of each other's traditions. In such contexts, I would say the divide is often more political than doctrinal. For example, I was in Basra in January. I'm a bit sad because I'm planning to go back to Iraq. I tell everybody this, I'm planning to go back to Iraq in December this year. I hope I'm going to be able to do it, but I don't know, with the war, it's going to be a bit difficult. But I spent time in Basra, in parts of Iraq, but I was in Basra prior to the war, and I went to a mosque where it's a Sunni Shia mosque. There, I observed Sunni and Shia worshippers praying side by side in the same mosque, while differences in practice were visible, such as the turba. You're familiar with the turba? So this is the Shia clay, and Shia prostrate on this turba. So if you have a prayer mat, and for Sunni Muslims, they're really not familiar with the turba at all. But for Shia believers, they pray or prostrate on the turba. And there's a story behind the turba, why it is part of the Shia religious tradition. But here you have, in a mosque in Basra, a Shia believer, a worshipper, praying on the turba. Next to him is a Sunni worshipper praying without the turba. So clearly they do pray together in Basra. Sorry? The same congregation. So this is a Sunni Shia mosque. There are mosques where it's only, Shia believers would go to the mosque, and there are also mosques for Sunnis. But that mosque in particular, I felt it was really interesting. Again, we can talk about theology, turba, what it means, the Shia ahadith that supported the idea of the turba, but I don't want to bore everyone because this is supposed to be geopolitics and Sunni Shia relations from a political perspective, but that is something that we can definitely have a discussion as well. So I would say the divide, I must say, is complex and cannot be reduced, to purely sectarian explanations. And again, current regional dynamics, particularly the perceived threat posed by Israel's regional dominance and ambitions, in many ways are prompting a reconsideration of how unity, solidarity, and belonging within the Muslim world are conceptualized. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Raihan. I think it brought me back to my undergraduate days. I'm your super junior in the Department of Political Science in IUM, and I thought that I was listening to a Middle Eastern politics subject. So it's quite amazing because we are living through a war, and and I think before we go deeper into what was mentioned and what was discussed, Prof, there's not a debate, but there has been a praise to the Prime Minister of Malaysia when he was discussing about the current war that is happening. He used the terms West Asia, Asia Barat, instead of Middle East. Which one do you think is the right term to be used in terms of what is happening? But before I ask you, can I ask the audience, do you use, can I see a show of hand if you use Middle East when you talk about this region? What about West Asia, Asia Barat? Or you don't care? Okay, Prof. Can we get your thought on it?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question, but also a very tricky question to answer. I think Middle East is a geopolitical construct. And many people would argue that it's also an Orientalist conception created by the West to understand the region or to classify the region. But we've been using it for many generations, right? So people are using the Middle East, and that is a familiar term. In the region, they use the Middle East. Yeah, so when you're listening to Al Jazeera باللغة العربية in Arabic, or Al Arabiya or media outlets, they say الشرق الأوسط. So they don't say West Asia. So I don't know to what extent, it's useful for us to change. But having said that, to change is one way of resisting the imposition on the region. So historically, we are reassessing and pushing back narratives as well as concepts that are being imposed on us. So I think it is a healthy exercise. So I'm not against it. But I do think it needs more debate, it needs more conversations. And also people in the region need to talk about it as well. So as far as I'm concerned, in the region at the moment, they're not using Al-Sharq al-Awsat. They're actually using, they are using Al-Sharq al-Awsat. They don't use West Asia. Again, and this is something that we talk about at Oxford as well, because I'm at the Middle East Center, right? So our degrees is actually Middle Eastern Studies. So do we change that? And yeah, so West Asia Studies. So again, it needs more time for it to materialize, for us to have that conversation, for us to shift the language. We used to have, sorry, Diane, I'm putting you on the spot again. So we have the Orientalist Institute. And after many, many years, we finally changed the Orientalist Institute to Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. So that is at the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at Oxford. But I feel that we need to have that conversation. It is important to have that conversation, but it is also important to have that conversation with people in the region. And that's something that we will continue to do as well.
Thank you, Prof. It has been bugging my head for the past few days, so it's good that I have the answer.
It's been bugging me too. So.
I have no idea, not yet. So Prof has unpacked quite a lot today. In the past 20, 30 minutes, Prof has unpacked what is happening in the region, including what is happening in GCC. And I like when you ask the question, is the ummah dead? And the concept of a thin ummah and a thick ummah is something that I think we should always try to espouse. Because I think this would show what is currently happening in terms of the solidarity of the people, not only for the people in the Arab world, but as well as for the Muslim majority nations, for example. Prof, at the start, you mentioned that before October 7th, a lot of the Gulf countries has started to normalize their relation with Israel, including, for example, Qatar and UAE. People were exchanging visits, tourism visits, and there were countries that did not say anything. And you mentioned the word strategic silence, whether they are with their sides or not. But then, when 7 October came, Israel has been using this as a mean or as a reasoning to commit the genocide in Gaza. We can see that 70,000 people has been killed by the Israeli forces. Was that the right strategy by the Palestinian resistance to did what they did in October 7th as a buffer for all of these countries not to normalize their relationship with Israel, or has that been backfired? What would be your thought on it?
Wow, that is a very, very good question. It's not going to be an easy one to answer, and it depends on whom you ask. I have a dear friend from Gaza. She lost her grandmother. She lost her uncle. Her father is still trapped in Gaza. Her cousin, a 14-year-old cousin at the time, was arrested, and people still don't know what happened to him. After speaking with her, I asked her, so what do you think about what's happening in Gaza? Are you angry with Hamas? Because clearly you ask people in Gaza whether or not they're angry with Hamas. And she said, I've lost so much and I can't go back to Gaza, but I think that was the right thing to do. But this is only one view. You ask other people, they will give you a different view. They will say it was ridiculous what Hamas did. From her perspective, and this is the thing, I do not want to speak on behalf of Palestinians because I don't live there and I don't know. It's very difficult to assess. So to assess whether or not Hamas did the right thing or not, I think Palestinians should be given the opportunity to assess whether or not they believe it was the right thing or the wrong thing. But from her perspective is that, and she's still, she's still solid in her views that it was the right thing to do. She said, we've lost so much, but that was the only way for us to achieve liberation. The occupation has really strangled Palestinians. I mean, we know that Gaza was an open-air prison, remains an open-air prison. And she said, with normalization, the Palestinian cause has been forgotten. And because it has been forgotten, it was just going to disappear. And therefore, what Hamas did actually allowed for the Palestinian cause to be debated and became a global cause and not just a Palestinian cause. And she felt that it was the right thing to do despite the severe losses that she suffered. The question is, Hamas did what it did, and people blame Hamas for what it did. But it's very rare, particularly in Western institutions, to blame Israel for retaliating the way it did. And that's the frustrating part. But yet, it is very hard for us to see media outlets to hold Israel accountable for the genocide that it's committed. Only now that we're seeing, some form of awakening on the part of the Western media outlets, as well as Western politicians or politicians in the West. But it has taken so long for us to reach that stage. Francesca Albanese talks about this. She said that we have to talk about the genocide, not talk about when the genocide has been completed. So what Israel is doing is completing the genocide. So clearly for Palestinians, they continue to talk about it. Was it the right thing? So there's so many views within Palestine. The West Bank is different. Even within the West Bank, people in Hebron is very different from people in Ramallah. Al-Khalil is very different as well. I mean, Khalil is Hebron, but so if you go to parts of Palestine, some are supportive of Hamas and what Hamas did. Others refuse to support Hamas because they said that what's the point of achieving liberation when you've lost so much and you don't know whether you're going to be able to rebuild? Are you going to be able to go back to Gaza? So I know I haven't really answered your question properly because I'm very careful and I'm restraining myself from sharing what I think. But I believe that is a question that Palestinians, only the Palestinians have the right answer that question, I think. The right thing, strategically, maybe strategically, it depends on how you look at it strategically. If you look at it from the perspective of highlighting the Palestinian cause, perhaps in the long run, maybe there's a possibility of Palestine achieving independence. But there's also a possibility of Palestine being erased completely. So you do have scholars who say that this is an important moment when we're looking at the Palestinian cause. Is it going to be like Australia when it comes to indigenous Australians? Or is it going to be like Algeria, where the Algerians were able to defeat the French occupation?
Where do you think the trajectory is heading currently, Prof?
Ah,
With what is happening, because the reawakening of the things that is happening in Palestine, you mentioned there has
Yeah.
been a shift in mindset even
Yeah.
in the Western Hemisphere, even with the Arab countries that has normalized the relation with Israel.
of course, that's a very good question. I think in terms of the populations and the Palestinian sumud, which means, what's sumud باللغة الإنجليزية? Sorry. Resilience, yes, resilience, sorry. The Palestinians, they talk about sumud, sumud, resilience. And I think they are adamant that they want to stand. So in Gaza, some are leaving if they can leave, but despite the fact that they've lost so much, if you follow them on social media, if you follow the rhetoric of their leaders, particularly someone like Mustafa al-Barghouti, they are talking about sumud, where Palestinians will stay and will continue to stay. And if they stay, it is going to be very difficult for Israel to eradicate 2 million people. And that is in Gaza. Even if we're talking about the decline of the population of Palestinians in Gaza, it is still going to be difficult to completely eradicate the population of Gaza. Even the West Bank. And that's why they've intensified attacks on Palestinian villages in the West Bank. The question is, are they going to stay? And on the one hand, I see resilience on the part of the Palestinians. On the other hand, being resilient is not sustainable if you're constantly pressured, if you're constantly losing your life, your lives, your families, and so on. So it is going to be tricky. But what's worse is that if they're able to push Palestinians out, here we're going to be looking at Jordan. Jordan will definitely be affected by the influx of Palestinian refugees. The West Bank leaving Jordan, leaving Palestine, that's going to be difficult. Egypt will also be affected by the influx of Palestinian refugees. And there are scholars who've worked with Palestinian refugees, and they say, particularly interviewing Palestinians in the West Bank, so my friends in the West Bank as well, they said they know once you leave, you're never going to come back. So that's why the sumud becomes so important, because do not leave, because if you leave, you're never going to come back. And that's why Palestinians, in the 1948, Palestinians, they still have the key to their homes, because they dream of going back to Palestine, and they haven't been able to go back. So there is that resistance as well, where leaving is actually not an option, and the only option is to survive this and to stay put. So if they're able to do that, I think it is going to be difficult for them for the Israelis to actually eradicate the Palestinians. But having said that, they've also been very vicious in terms of kind of targeting Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza as well. We're looking at continued starvation. We're also looking at the lack of medicine coming in. People are dying from diseases. They're not dying from bombs, but they're dying from diseases and lack of food and malnutrition. It is very difficult to say. There's one element that might help, and that is the international community, whatever that means. Pressure from the international community, activists putting a lot of pressure, boycotts. A lot of people say that BDS, and that's how the South African, apartheid was able to be dismantled. So there are many moving parts and many components that we have to take into consideration to see where this is going.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think there will be a lot more question on Palestine and Gaza, so you can write your questions first, and you can ask your questions later. I would like to bring our attention to the current war with Iran, Prof. You mentioned a weak Iran will be advantageous to Israel's hegemony in the Middle East. And you mentioned the amount of numbers of the people that are living in Gaza is around 2 million, and they're still trying to commit genocide. But in Iran, it's, as Daniel mentioned, one of the longest civilization on earth. They have 90 million people, and they're still trying to wage a war with Iran together with the United States. But I was interested in when you mentioned about how do these Gulf countries choose which sides they would like to support. You mentioned Oman and Qatar, of course, they are playing the negotiating role, as well as I think Daniel also mentioned that even until before they killed Ali Khamenei, the foreign minister of Oman mentioned that a deal is within reach. But then they still killed Ali Khamenei. They still did a war that is still happening currently in Iran and expanding it to Lebanon. Just trying to get your opinion in terms of how do these Arab countries choose who do they side on. You mentioned Saudi Arabia is doing strategic silence. Even the UAE, we do not know where they stand. Is there a historical aspect of it, or is there something that is deeper?
I think these countries, they're recollaborating their positions. It is very difficult for me to say that they're going to continue to rely on the United States. I think that is no longer the case. Even if they maintain good relations with the United States, because they're very diplomatic, but I think they will be looking for other options in terms of guaranteeing their security. Relations with Iran, clearly it's not going to be the same. These relations are going to be very different from now on, because they've lost a lot of, even before, relations with Iran, were never great. But I think now, after what happened with Iran targeting civilian infrastructure, with Iran targeting airports, targeting desalination, water desalination plants, it's going to be very difficult for these countries to maintain relations with Iran. But having said that, they're also aware that they have to live with Iran in the region. It's not going anywhere. You have 90 million Iranians living side by side, living in the region. So it is going to be very difficult for them to ignore Iran. Countries like countries like Qatar and Oman, I'm pretty sure they will pursue diplomatic efforts in terms of repairing relations with Iran, making sure that Iran is incorporated within their security arrangements. But they will be very careful with Iran. But at the same time, I do not see them as maintaining hostility towards Iran, because I think clearly these countries are aware the importance of having a stable region or living in a stable region. Countries like the UAE, to be honest, I have been very confused about the UAE. I think the UAE, it's very difficult when we talk about the UAE. They have also been responsible in spreading Islamophobia in the West. The UAE recently said that they're not going to send their students to the UK because the UK sponsors the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a country that is very hostile towards Islam in the West, towards Islamic political movements, and they pride on being very close to the Israelis. They're also very proud that they're very different from other parts of the Muslim world. And I think that alignment has also exposed them in the region, but also in the broader Muslim world. Having said that, what happened in Sudan, so that's another factor as well when it comes to UAE's strategic interest. And clearly this is if I can say this, I think it's about aligning themselves with Israel and the US, at least to make it easier for the UAE to see that US and Israel, as long as we maintain good relations with the US and Israel, I think that is going to kind of shield them from criticisms, particularly their engagement in Sudan, their relations with Russia, because they're also kind of a site of money laundering for Russian activities. So clearly the UAE is engages in various activities, and therefore being closer to Israel, being closer to the US can actually shield them. That's one interpretation. But I'm not sure, to be honest, with the UAE, where it stands. A lot of people say that they're just confused when it comes to the UAE's position. Saudi Arabia, as I've said, a lot more strategic. They're more quiet, and I think they tend to assess the situation by maintaining their kind of strategic silence, if I can put it that way. So, yeah, so it is, even if they repair relations with Iran, it's not, I think they're going to have to be very careful. They've always been very careful, but now they are aware that Iran is not reluctant to retaliate if they have to retaliate. So I think the region will be under a lot of pressure, even if the war ends, just to make sure that, I think it's going to take a while for it to recover from this war. And the longer it persists, the harder it is to go back to what it used to be.
Thank you so much, Prof. Before I open up to our audiences to ask burning questions, I want to come back to Malaysia for a bit, Prof. You mentioned about the Ummah binded by faith and other rituals such as Hajj and prayers. You mentioned in Basra, there's a mosque that has a congregation of Sunni and Shi'i in the same Jama'ah. I think you also mentioned that your father studied in Jamiat Al-Azhar in Egypt. So that connection between Malaysia and that region has been going on for quite a long time, through education, through religion, of course, through its people. So when they came back, they would teach, as you mentioned, your father taught Islam around Malaysia, and it has shaped the way that Malaysian would think about the region itself. Not only about the faith, but about the political activity that is happening within the region, even though we're very, very far away. So how has that, I would say, deep generational connection shaped the way Malaysians see and kind of understand what is happening in Middle East today? Whether it has been blindsided probably by one side of the thinking, or has that been helpful for us to understand more and to be in solidarity with the Ummah in what is happening in the region? Yeah.
So these networks have existed, right? Through pilgrimage, to education, traveling. And I think with social media, but also in how we are connecting with others, these networks have also been facilitated by technology. I think we are more exposed to what's happening in other parts of the world. We are also more exposed to how Islam is practiced in other parts of the world, by engaging with social media, by engaging with other forms of communications. What I would say is that there's perhaps more understanding of the region from the perspective of Malaysians, because I remember maybe 20 years ago when we talk about Shiism in Malaysia, people are just so confused about what Shia believers kind of operate and how they think. But I think today people have, I wouldn't say a better understanding, but better awareness of the existence of Shia believers. So at least they're aware that, Shia believers, in parts of the world are also active in engaging in promoting solidarity,
especially
with
after the war in Iran.
After the war in Iran. So you can see how Muslims in Malaysia are engaging with issues in the region. I think Palestine perhaps has really kind of fostered that understanding and that sense of solidarity, because solidarity with the Palestinians has been part of the Malaysian imagination. So I would say we are talking about these networks. These networks have existed before, but now are being accelerated, facilitated by various tools and various agents. And now it's much more pronounced when we're looking at these networks, and we do have a better understanding. But I must say, and caution as well, sometimes it can also cause to misunderstanding because of what we consume on social media and the kind of lack of information that we get, which is not very academic, but also kind of information that can be quite shallow in terms of understanding not just Shiism, but how Islam is practiced in various parts of the Muslim world.
Thank you so much, Prof. Now I would like to open the floor to our audiences. If you have any questions, please raise your hands. My colleague Lydia will be passing you the mic. If it is possible for you to stand up, introduce yourselves.
Hi, thank you. I'm Rakib from, I just finished my diploma studies recently. So my question would probably focus, just go a bit deeper into what you said, several things that you said earlier. But the key word here is a very heavy term that's been coined a lot when this war actually started. It's been quoted by both sides, important people, right? The word is Armageddon. So as we see, even people like Peter Hegseth, he tried to motivate his troops, the US troops who are being sent to the Middle East and those who are stationed there. One of his remarks was saying, we are fighting an Armageddon war. And this sentiment is also true on the other side. And as I study deeper in this conflict, right, we start to see a lot of similarities when we study the fields of hadith and many other things. So my question is, like, what are your thoughts on this term being coined? And do you think it is it turning into a reality? Are we actually heading into an Armageddon war? Essentially, the coming of, as for many of the religions, the Antichrist. Are we preparing for that period? A period full of hardships. So, just wanted to hear your thoughts from that. Thank you.
One more, Lydia.
Hi, I'm Bazli. I'm an economist. I'm wondering in particular on Israel's stated intent on Greater Israel, the region. I'm wondering how the GCC views that, whether they're taking that seriously, because obviously that affects them potentially directly. It does, maybe if you have any insights, whether that is a long-term policy objective by Israel or that's just something that they're just bluffing. But they are already making quite significant forays in making that come true, right? So just wondering how this fits into it.
We're talking about the occupation, the invasion of Iraq by US forces. I must say the region has been so unfortunate. It's not that because we're better, but because they've been unfortunate. We're looking at oil in the region. We're looking at American strategic and security interest in the region. We're also looking at a rogue nation, and I'm going to be very vocal, a rogue nation like Israel being implanted in the region, creating a lot of tensions in the region and making it very difficult for people in the region to kind of live in a peaceful way, if I can put it that way. Syria, Bashar al-Assad left. What did Israel do? The first thing it did is started bombing parts of Syria, military installations, and then it annexed parts of Syria. Why is that the case? Because it wants to create a buffer zone for the buffer zone. So the Golan Heights was supposed to be a buffer zone, right? So they annexed the Golan Heights. That was illegal under international law. They are yet to return the Golan Heights to Syria. They refused to return the Golan Heights to Syria. Donald Trump came and recognized Israel's claim over the Golan Heights. And then what happens is that Bashar al-Assad left. They annexed more parts of Syria by saying that, oh, yeah, we need a buffer zone for the Golan Heights. So clearly, what I'm trying to say is that we are very fortunate, but doesn't make us better, if I can put it that way. And I grew up here, so for me, I used to believe that as well, studying the region. There are just so many conflicts in the region, but I feel that they're just factors that contributed to the situation in the region. And there are just so many factors that we are very fortunate that we're shielded from these factors. At least that's my perspective. Some people might disagree with me, but I think that's my personal view when it comes to the issue. When it comes to the question of Armageddon, to be honest, when you talk to historians, they would say that conflicts are not new. Wars are not new. For us, we are being confronted with something new, but that doesn't mean that that hasn't happened before. It's World War II, World War I, the Mongols invading and flattening Baghdad during the Abbasid period, and many talked about the end of the world. So what I would say is that I don't think necessarily, I think that this is it. This is the end of all wars. I feel this is another phase of escalation. We're talking about reordering of the region. We're talking about the region being permanently altered because of this war. The longer it lasts, the harder it is to go back to the way it used to be before. We'll be looking at regional realignment. We'll be looking at alliances being formed, new enemies being created. So I think in the region at the moment, when I was studying the Middle East, when I first started in 2009, when I started my PhD, the main concern that they were talking about was Iran. So 2009. So Iran's interference or interventions in the region through Hezbollah, through Shiite actors in Bahrain, through the Houthis. So I think that was the major topic. But now I think, and I remember, looking at Saudi ulama at that time, and the Saudi ulama was saying that the Rafida, so referring to Shia 12ers, there is a derogatory identification of Shia 12ers. They're worse than the Zionists. So these are fatwas issued by Saudi religious authorities when dealing with Israel and Iran, saying that the Israelis are not even as bad as the Iranians. So this was fatwa issued in 2009, 2011, and so on. But I would say the rhetoric has also shifted in the region. So there are concerns, going to your question, the greater Israel. Because slowly, after seeing what happened in Gaza, what's happening in Lebanon, and now Iran, social media outlets, analysts in the region are talking about their concerns, and that is greater Israel and Israel's ambitions in the region. So clearly, they are quite concerned about what is happening in the region, particularly Israel's role in the region.
Is the GCC complacent in this? Are they taking it seriously? Is it a serious policy objective? Because, if you want to figure out when it ends, it doesn't end if Israel's ambition is real, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe following up to that, like, what can Muslim countries even do? Because it does feel that there's a sense of like giving up after the Arab-Israeli war, because they just cannot fight America.
No, of course, yeah. No, again, thank you for the question. To take a unified position is going to be very difficult, because most countries have their own national interest, and they are quite concerned about their national interest. You look at Egypt, despite the fact that they're sympathetic to Palestine, they're thinking about their national interest and their reliance on the United States. The same with Jordan. They're also thinking about their national interest and the fact that they're also reliant on the United States. And that is the case with GCC countries, because they don't want to antagonize America, and nobody wants to antagonize America. It remains the most powerful country in the world. I mean, with the global energy crisis, other countries will be affected. We will be affected, even in the context of Malaysia. The UK, forget about it. I think we're going to be hit first. But the point is that the United States is going to be able to withstand this because they're the largest oil producer in the world, the largest gas producer in the world. And economically, the impact on the US is not going to be as intense as the impact would be on other countries. So here, what I'm trying to say is that here we're looking at a country that is powerful, right? And therefore, other countries are tiptoeing, walking on eggshells, trying to deal with Donald Trump, who's temperamental, who's also kind of erratic. So everybody's quite concerned about how to deal with him. But the issue is that if all countries keep thinking about their national interests, at some point, they're all going to be affected. Because if one country is affected, other countries will also be affected. And we're starting to see how America's kind of targeting certain countries. We looked at Venezuela, and then after that, starting to target Iran. And clearly, this is a country, including Israel, they would do whatever they want to do. And not to have a unified position and to put your foot down and say that that's it, we're going to have to push back, I think that would be the wrong strategy. Because if you think that you're not going to be affected, you will be affected. So Iran is a very good example of how nobody wants to antagonize America, nobody wants to antagonize Israel. Everybody's walking, tiptoeing around these two countries, don't want to say anything that would, put you on the spot. And yet, with the war in Iran, all of us, we're all being targeted. I mean, the global energy crisis, and that's because we haven't really taken a step to actually push back when there was enough space and time to actually push back. And I think European countries are to blame for it as well. I mean, if you look at the UK, you're looking at France, you're looking at these countries, they haven't had the courage to actually push back. And only now that they're starting to push back, but at what price? So clearly, we're talking about national interests, and all countries are focusing so much on their national interests, but actually their national interest comes to protect your national interests is for you to stay united, unified, and take a strong position to actually contain actors like America and Israel. But we haven't done that. So for me, at least that's my perspective when it comes to how can these countries kind of move beyond what's happening now and try and create stability in the region. So I think countries like Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, yes, they're very sympathetic to the Palestinians. I'm not sure about the Emiratis, but I think the UAE, Saudi Arabia and Qatar clearly very sympathetic to Palestine. But to them, let's not antagonize America. So when Trump came, remember the celebration. The private jet that was given to Trump as a gift from the Qataris, and the Saudis as well in signing, trade relations, bilateral relations, billions of dollars, all in the name of keeping America on side, and yet that hasn't worked. And the reason it hasn't worked because clearly with an actor like Trump, I wouldn't say America in general, but someone like Trump couldn't care less whether or not he is going to come after his own allies. Or look after his own allies. So I do think that perhaps these countries, and I think that this conversation is actually happening. So I'm not saying anything new. These conversations are happening where countries in the region, but also globally, are starting to reassess where they stand and starting to reassess what can we do to actually protect the global community. Because you can't really rely on one superpower that is erratic to actually protect the global community. And that's why we're seeing Keir Starmer coming out and saying that we're not going to participate in this war. China's playing its role, and other countries are also playing their roles. Malaysia's playing its role as well. So, and I think it has to shift. In a multipolar world, it really has to change so much in terms of how we engage with this. And I do think that the conversation is happening. Whether it's too late, I think better late than never. But clearly, focusing on your national interests and thinking that you're not going to be targeted is no longer sustainable. and strength in numbers in terms of pushing back. So on your own, it's very hard to push back against a powerful country like the United States. But together, I think collectively, it's going to be much easier. And one thing, if I may add, is that the focus has been so much on the US. But actually, if you think about it, the US participated in the war in Iran because of the Israelis, right? Trump wasn't that interested in attacking Iran. I mean, I remember I was in Basra one night, they closed off Iranian airspace, and I was thinking, oh dear, I'm not going to be able to leave Iraq now, which was fine because I love being in Iraq, although I feel sorry for my husband and my daughter. But again, that was when Israelis were kind of putting pressure on America to attack Iran, and Trump said that, no, it's not going to happen because the Saudis and the Qataris convinced Trump in January not to do it. But then suddenly it happened. And you have policymakers in the US saying that it was Israel that actually pushed America to actually attack Iran. So clearly here you have Israel that has been responsible in starting this war. So the question is, we are focusing so much on the US, countries in Europe are also focusing so much on the US, and yet the focus hasn't been on Israel because Israel can just do whatever it wants. And how do you contain that? How do you then stop an actor like Israel from suddenly attacking Doha without really, American permission? Yes, they knew about it, but I didn't think they said that go and attack Doha. They did it on their own. So I think clearly that is another element that has to be taken into consideration and not just looking at the United States, because clearly with the United States, despite the fact that they're very powerful, they're kind of limited as well in terms of how they're able to contain Israel.
Thank you so much, Prof. Next round of questions. Can I see a raise of hand?
Thank you, Prof. My name is Adi. I'm from Sabah, actually. I'm paid because I had another event as well. My question is, compared to Israel and Palestine, it was immediately everyone drew the line on where they stand on the issue. Vis-a-vis what's going on in Iran, there's a lot more ambiguity, and it becomes easy for a lot of consent manufacturing from, let's say, media or tech capital, mobilizing how to control the narrative, essentially. So essentially, you hear voices from everywhere except for the Iranian people, owing to the media blackout. So it's hard to hear what's going on with people in Iran. But you have, on one side, under the idea of free Iran, you would have people saying free Iran from American imperialism, another saying free Iran from the theocracy. So how do we exactly navigate and find out what is it that the Iranian people stand on the matter? Because you have possibly people speaking for the Iranian people, and definitely you've seen the weaponizing of the diaspora and hardcore Pahlavis and probably even almost revivalists of the Sasanian Empire, almost maximizing as much of the narrative that they can. How do we exactly navigate through this ambiguity? Because it seems now Israel-Palestine easy for people to take stance, but for Iran, people are very much muddled on the nuances.
Thank you. Next. Can you come forward? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum, Prof. Thank you for the inspiring talk just now. My name is Danish. I'm from the Situangsa Constituency Office. And my question to you is more relating to the current technological developments, especially as we all know we are now currently in the age of AI. How would you expect the war, the conflict right now to play out? Is it going to be more, are there going to be more inclusions of technological warfare or informational warfare that will be going on as we go on with this conflict? Yeah.
Thank you. One more, please. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Abdul Rahman Amin from Department of Political Science from IIUM. Anyway, my question is, as we look into Malaysia's historical context, or I don't know, even by the constitution, Malaysia has been not really that accommodating, hostile, like in terms of treating Shi'i belief, the belief system and all that. But like after the war, we've seen that there seems to be a solidarity among the Malaysians, and in fact, also PMX Malaysia might only perhaps might only be the OIC member country that has declared a condemnation of the attack in Iran. And so yeah, my question is, how do you think does this shape now the current public perception of Shias here in Malaysia? Like, do you think there would be like a shift in narrative? Like, would Malaysia be more accommodating, more inclusive this time? Yeah, to Shia beliefs.
I might answer your question first and then go to the other questions. Okay. I think it is a bit difficult to say because I don't live in Malaysia, and I left Malaysia 20 years ago, but I do follow what's happening in Malaysia through Facebook, really. No, I'm joking. But, you know, from time to time you do. I'm that old, by the way, so it's like people have Instagram. TikTok, yeah. But I do finally have an Instagram account. I created that this year, so I was very happy. Was it last year? I think I created Instagram, yeah. Okay, that's not very relevant, but having said that, I think it's more of a global phenomenon rather than a Malaysia issue. One thing about Shia religious tradition, I'm Sunni, by the way, so I just have to put it out there because, you know, if I talk about it, then people would think I have converted to Shiism. But because I've studied, you know, kind of Shiism, one thing that's appealing within the Shia religious tradition is the concept of injustice and martyrdom. So when Imam Hussein, you know, was killed by Yazid, the idea is that he fought against injustice. He fought against tyrannical rulers. And that is appealing in a world where we feel that we're seeing so much injustice, where we're seeing that the Palestinians being treated abominably, and yet you don't have anyone supporting them except for Shia actors in the region. So you have the Houthis, the Zaidi religious tradition, Hezbollah immediately entered the conflict, Iran, you know, one of the countries that actually continued to support the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian cause. So there's a lot of kind of admiration, but also sympathy for the Shiite religious tradition. And if you look at the Houthis, I know even at Oxford, you have medical doctors who would come to Yemeni colleagues and say that, oh, thank God for the Houthis and for Yemen. And that's because they appeared courageous, couldn't care less, and they were like, we will continue to fight in support of the Palestinians. So clearly there's a lot of admiration for not just Shia actors, but also Shia religious tradition that draws from these concepts. And I think that will continue to influence, not so much converting, you know, because of theology, but it's more political solidarity with countries like Iran, the resistance movement, or even Iraqi Shiite militias and so on. I think theologically, I think people just don't know enough as far as I'm concerned about Shiite theology. I think unless you really study Shiite theology and do some comparative analysis between Shiism and Sunni Islam. But I think politically, that's where the appeal comes. The fact that we are seeing Shia resistance movement taking a stance and taking a position. I don't know about Malaysia, that's what I can say. But I know globally that there is a lot of admiration for Shia resistance movement. But having said that, there was also a lot of kind of frustration with what happened in Syria. So if you talk to Syrians, they're not going to say that they're happy with Hezbollah. Hezbollah was actually involved in supporting Bashar al-Assad's regime. Iran's the same. They supported and sustained Bashar al-Assad's regime. Here we're looking at a repressive, perhaps one of the most brutal regimes in the world. So it depends on where you go as well. So the Palestinian cause is one thing, but geopolitics and actions of Shia actors in the region can also influence how others perceive them or how others will continue to perceive them. So clearly, I think it's more complex than just saying that now because they supported the Palestinian cause, people are just going to be very fond of them. Because I speak to my Syrian colleagues or Syrian friends, and they always get a bit nervous when it comes to Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah and Iran's involvement in Syria. Having said that, there were conflicting views as well, because Iran, some wanted to intervene because clearly they were not fond of Bashar al-Assad. Other factions within Iran said, no, this is not our fight. So it was not that simple that the Iranians decided to intervene. Clearly, there were debates within the Iranian government itself during this time, 2012, 2003, whether or not to intervene in Syria. But finally, they decided to intervene in Syria, not for theological reasons. Many would argue for political and geopolitical reasons, because Syria is a friendly Arab country towards Iran, unlike the other countries in the region. I hope I've answered your question. I think it's more complicated, but I think the Malaysian angle, I think Malaysians will be able to answer that better because you live here, you're aware of the debates. But I think that there will be, definitely political solidarity. And I must say, it's not just a matter of sympathizing with Iran because of its, idea of resistance and so on, but it is also against imperialism. It is against the US kind of imposing narratives on the region, but also on Muslim societies, the Islamophobia industry. I think there's a lot of anger in many parts of the global south because of what's been happening in the region, not just the region, other parts of the world. So you're seeing Venezuela, you're seeing the invasion of Iraq in 2003, Vietnam before. So clearly everybody's they're just fed up. They've had a lot of anger, frustration, and then you see a country like Iran or the Houthis deciding that they're not going to care, they're just going to continue to fight, or a group like Hamas, for example, an insignificant actor in comparison to Israel, saying that we're going to push back. So there's a lot of solidarity and support, not because they support the ideology of these groups, but because they support what these groups represent. And that is the anti-imperial, kind of anti-empire kind of narratives and ideals that they propagate. So I think it's not that simple in terms of looking at whether we support Iran because of its theology or because of its political positions. There are broader issues that would actually compel some to support Iran, which takes me to your question, actually, because here, if you go to protest movements in the UK or in the US or even in Europe, some people question, why do you have students, clearly non-Muslims, but supporting Iran, right? And in many ways supporting Hezbollah, in many ways supporting the Houthis, and they chant in support of Iran and Houthis. I've got students, people telling me in Santa Barbara, of all places, or Colombia, where to them, they would chant in support of Iran. Do they support Iran's theocratic government? So it becomes a bit more complicated. Is it the theocratic government, or is it because Iran is courageous enough to stand up and say that we're not going to sit back and not fight against the US or American aggression or Israeli aggression? So I think it is actually more complex in that sense. Going to your question, I think this is really fascinating. I'm not really an expert on Iran. Rowena should have been here because she really is an expert on Iran. But if I can say this, is that clearly you have the monarchists. Many of them, they left post-revolution. So 1979, these are Iranians who supported the monarchy, they left, and they are the ones who have been so hardcore in support of the Shah of Iran and the return of their prince to Iran, the crown prince to Iran. And the narrative has been, why not? Let's bomb Iran. We have to get rid of the theocratic government. This is a subversive government. They've killed their people, and therefore it's important to topple this regime and install the crown prince as someone who could lead the country. I would say they, clearly they're operating in the West. Canada, Toronto is actually, very strong kind of place for them, where they're advocating for some of these ideas. The US as well. Clearly, they're very, strong, even in London. So you have, a group of them who are very vocal. But having said that, I wouldn't say they represent all Iranians. And maybe people in Iran who are frustrated with the government, with the regime, would probably support that narrative. But I think it's a bit difficult to know how many Iranians actually support this idea. And after the bombardment of Iran, you can see many Iranians who would say that, yes, we don't want the theocratic government, but we also don't want the Americans to come and destroy the country. So clearly there's a lot of anger towards the Americans because, here you are destroying the country instead of kind of helping to remove the regime. Because how do you remove the regime? Trump couldn't care less. Didn't he say something about bombing the country to stone age? And that's the narrative that's being advocated by the Trump administration. In terms of support for the regime, this is where, again, I'm not an expert on Iran, but I have a colleague who works on this, and she was saying clearly it's going to be hard to understand. She claims that there are around 10 million who are very loyal to the government. And this is a country of 90 million. So she said, 10 to 15 million, maximum 20 million people who are very supportive of the theocratic regime. And these are hardcore supporters of Ayatollah Khamenei, and also supportive of the IRGC and the bureaucracy as well as the institutions in Iran. That's a lot, 10 to 20 million people, but not representative of the whole country. Here you have a country of 90 million. What about the rest? So according to analysts, they're saying, yes, they don't like the government, but at the same time, they don't support the idea of the Americans coming in, bombing their country or invading their country, because for them, it is something that they have to deal with, right? And bombing their country has only allowed the regime to use that narrative to mobilize support from Iranians who otherwise couldn't care less about the regime. So now you're seeing a lot of solidarity with the government, not necessarily being fond of the government, but supportive of the government because they feel that this is the time, to unite, but more importantly, to actually fight against American aggression. So I don't think it is that simple in terms of the dynamics or political dynamics within Iran, because clearly you have different views, different factions, but attacking the country, whatever hope they had for regime change died with the war, I would say. Because I don't think Iranians today would say that we're going to take to the streets and topple the regime because there's an opportunity. Because at the moment, with all the destruction, the bombardment of civilian facilities, infrastructure, cultural sites, and I think it hurts so much to think this, when you have cultural sites, heritage sites being bombed, this is history. That doesn't just belong to Iranians, but belong to all of us. Because it's part of our history as a human species that's being targeted, and I think Iranians are clearly very, very upset about that. The same with Iraq, I must say. So those in the diaspora, like Ahmed Shalabi, in 2003, clearly called for the United States to invade Iraq. But within Iraq, yes, they didn't like Saddam Hussein, but they were not supportive of the idea of America invading Iraq. And I've spoken to some Iraqis, and I asked them, because Iraq has experienced stability in the last 5 years, so from 2008 until now, 2018, after ISIS was kind of defeated in Iraq, Iraq has seen some degree of stability. You're seeing investors investing in Iraq, from Kuwait, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, European companies as well investing in Iraq. And going to Baghdad was just amazing. It's vibrant. You see cafes everywhere. And it was just so beautiful to see. And then you ask some people, and you have some Americans, because I traveled with a couple of Americans who said that, what do you think? Clearly Saddam is no longer here. This is fantastic, what you have now. And these Iraqis were so annoyed. And they're saying that the reason we have stability is not because the Americans invaded. The Americans invaded and destroyed the country. But the reason we have stability in Iraq today is because Iraqis worked so hard to overcome sectarian divide, to overcome economic problems, political problems, to come together to rebuild their country. So I don't think that narrative is like, we're going to come and liberate you works at all. Yeah. Oh, yes, of course, yeah. I think that's, again, it's a fascinating question. Clearly, technology is playing an important role, not just in the war in Iran, but also in Gaza. We're seeing how AI companies are, producing technologies that are being used by IDF, being used by different militaries, even the Americans actually using similar technologies to actually launch the war in both Gaza in the context of the Israelis, but also in Iran. And I know that there's an article in the Financial Times about the Shahid school. So the Iranian girls, the school girls who were killed and massacred by the bombs, by the American bombs. Actually, that was an AI. They suspect that AI was used in that to identify that school. Yeah, the Palantir. Yeah, so clearly AI is being used, but to what extent these technologies are safe, and never safe, but you know what I mean, accurate in terms of targeting, infrastructure and facilities, that's again to be questioned as well. So clearly that is something that we're going to have to deal with. I don't know whether I'm going to have a job or not, because clearly AI is taking over. But that is a question that, clearly you have experts who are looking at that. I don't really work on the subject, but I do think that it is going to become increasingly important to look into that, not just in terms of employment purposes, but also in how military targets are being established, how technologies are being used, how these technologies are ethically used or unethically used. So clearly the ethical question is going to be very important as well.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mr. Daniel.
Okay, thanks, Raihan, and I'm mindful of time. So I've got 3 questions. You've got great memory, by the way. I noticed you're not even taking down notes on the questions. Let me try. First question, how important will Turkey, China, and, well, let's say these 2 superpowers be in the conflict moving forward? Second question, now in some of my conversations, I've got very good, I would call her even a sister in Ramallah, who was saying that the Hamas October 7 attacks had upended a lot of good work that Fatah was doing. More from I don't know whether this is true, so I would like to get your thoughts on that, because earlier you also alluded to this unfortunate young lady who said that she was glad that the attacks happened. That's the second question. The third question is a bit of, how does it end? So I'm going to preface it with Good Friday a few days ago, and we read that the Holy Sepulchre, am I pronouncing it correctly, in Palestine, was closed down, not being able to be used. And we often forget that a lot of inter-religious expressions and practices can still happen in Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and even in Iran, right? I was watching a podcast where a rabbi called Benjamin Netanyahu the Dajjal and said that you have more religious freedom in Iran for Jews than actually you have in Israel itself. So the question becomes, so keeping in mind that, and even in America, where the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens are calling out this, why are we doing it for Israel and not for America first, but also questioning the theological position where the so-called argument for the rapture is a falsehood from a theological perspective. And of course, finally, what you said earlier about, I'm just trying to draw all these 3 threads together, the UAE still being more, or Saudi being more pro, I suppose, Jewish or Zionist in that regard, as opposed to being pro-Iranian Shia because of that. So how will it end? If my question makes sense.
The UAE, you mean?
No, so okay, I'll put it this way. Is opposition to Shiaism stronger than Zionism? Or is it the other way around, keeping in light the theological underpinnings? Okay.
Again, very, very difficult questions to answer. I think things have changed when it comes to Sunni-Shia relations. I think post-ISIS, countries in the region realize that sectarian rhetoric that is subversive can be very problematic. So the Saudi government under the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman started to kind of shift the narrative a little bit. So they kind of stopped using sectarian rhetoric because that's no longer appealing or popular. Shiites in Saudi Arabia, particularly the eastern province of Mintaqa Sharqiyya, Ahsa and Qatif, in these areas, they now say that the situation in Saudi Arabia has changed a lot. So they feel that there's more religious freedom for the Shia in Saudi Arabia. They feel that they're part of the Saudi statehood, and they feel that in that sense of belonging. And that was not the case when Mohammed bin Salman or when the Saudi religious establishment was very powerful, because that was when the theological kind of arguments were being put forward against the Shia. So you had Saudi religious establishment, the members of the board of senior council, who would kind of put forward regressive fatwa that would target and challenge Shiite theology. So I think things have changed in the context of sectarian narrative in the region. And I think it was all because of ISIS. When ISIS came, started targeting Shia, you seeing photos of ISIS, decapitating Shia believers. In Iraq, for example, the Spiker massacre in Tikrit really, witnessed horrific attacks against Shia believers in Iraq. And I think ISIS really shook everyone to their core when it comes to the impact of sectarian violence. And I feel that that has changed a lot. And as a result, from 2018 onwards, there are efforts to kind of promote interfaith dialogue in the region, efforts to kind of promote rapprochement between Sunnis and Shia. And I'm talking about the region in general. So you feel that, that kind of theological, religious arguments have been kind of countered with the idea of interfaith, with the idea of solidarity and cross-sectarian cooperation. So what I would say is that they might be suspicious of Iran, but for political reasons. For religious reasons, I think maybe that's not the case anymore. It has always been political, but religion has been used to actually justify political arguments or political positions. And there's just so many examples of that. And what I would say is that suspicious of Iran because of what's happening now, thinking of Iran's capabilities, thinking of Iran's intentions in the region, thinking of what Iran is going to do next. Does Iran remain a threat, and so on? So I think these are the questions that the Saudis will be asking. But I wouldn't think that they're going to be asked theological questions, because that debate has slowly kind of shifted from being debated and talked about. So Israel and Iran, I think this is where, if we're following the situation in the region, clearly Israel is emerging as an important player in the region. Not only an important player, but a very powerful player in the region. And this is quite concerning for countries in the region, because we're looking at Israel, who has one of the strongest military capabilities in the region. We're also looking at Israel, which is deeply embedded in various parts of the region because their intelligence is pretty superior. So what happened to the pager attacks in Lebanon? Remember the pager attack? So clearly we're talking about a country that is willing to push boundaries when it comes to ethical considerations. I mean, it was absolutely unethical what they did with the pager attacks. And I can't believe in the West, reading newspaper articles, they were astonished and almost celebratory of Israel's pager attacks in Lebanon. They were saying astonishing, amazing, fascinating what they're able to do, without really condemning what happened, because it was just, you can't believe, I couldn't believe it, that you're reading newspaper articles and they were just kind of praising Israel's military capabilities. And that, I will say that's mainly because Israel doesn't act with consideration. They push, ethical considerations aside, and they will do anything to maximize victory. So that's why they're able to do these things. And we are all, other countries, we're kind of constrained by ethical considerations, things to do and things not to do, international law and so on, that we have to abide by. But beyond that point, I would say Sorry, I get distracted. But beyond that point, I would say that that's a player that's going to be important. Israel is a powerful player in the region and perhaps the most dangerous player in the region because they don't really have that ethical considerations when it comes to attacking Syria or attacking Lebanon. They attacked Doha. For me, that was astonishing. The fact that they just decided to attack Doha and other countries as well. So that is what the region will be concerned about, including Saudi Arabia. I don't know about the UAE. I'm very honest because the UAE has very good relations with Israel. Very good relations with Israel. Bahrain is another country that has very good relations with Israel. The Israeli ambassador to Bahrain has very good relations with the ruling family of Bahrain. And the same with the UAE as well. So these are the two countries that have normalized relations, have very deep security arrangements and agreements with Israel. So I don't know whether that is going to change as well. Are they going to be concerned about Israel? Maybe they are. But again, at the moment, they're not going to be targeted by Israel. And we go back to the idea of national interest again. If you're not being targeted, so you're not that concerned about how they treat other people. And that is something that we probably have to start thinking about, particularly when it comes to the countries in the region. I hope I've answered that question, but I do think that it is going to be, yeah. Okay, with Fatah, I would say, again, I have a friend in Ramallah as well, several friends in Ramallah. Mixed opinions when it comes to Fatah. Those who are supportive of Fatah, they are part of the establishment. But Fatah has been accused of corruption, of becoming a security agent for Israel. So at least that's the narrative of people living in the West Bank. And those who are supportive of Fatah would say that they are trying to cooperate, they're trying to find a peaceful solution. So clearly you have two views when it comes to the role of Fatah in the region, or particularly in Palestine. But those who are critical would say that, they're doing Israel's bidding. So they're arresting journalists, they've closed down Al Jazeera in Ramallah. They're also arresting activists. And clearly they're trying to contain any forms of resistance in the West Bank because that's what they're doing and they're benefiting from that security arrangement with Israel. But those who are supportive of Fatah would say that they're trying their hardest. The Hamas way is not the right way because clearly we're looking at, mass destruction, mass killings. And is it really worth it? Probably not. So clearly I must say that there are two views when it comes to Fatah. And with Turkey, I think Turkey will play an important role. Turkey is already playing an important role in Syria. So with Ahmad al-Shara, whom Trump thinks is very good looking, apparently. Didn't he say that? He's a good looking man, attractive man. But clearly Turkey is playing an important role in the region as well. Turkey is playing an important role in the context of Palestine, which is why Donald Trump, particularly Israel, didn't want Turkey to be part of the border peace. Because for them, Turkey is a force that would not side or would not be intimidated by Israel. And I think the fact that Turkey is not going to be intimidated by Israel will expose Turkey as well. Remember in the beginning, I talked about Naftali Bennett saying that Turkey is problematic. And there's also this video recently that was published by the Israelis where they showed all the leaders who have been assassinated, including Nasrallah, Khamenei, and then they showed Erdogan sitting on his own, which indicates that he's probably next. So clearly the narrative and the rhetoric is moving towards Turkey, particularly from the part of Israelis. So that's...
Thank you so much, Prof. Before I request you to conclude our session for today, I would like to ask if any of the member of the audience who would like to give a short commentary of what we have discussed today. Maybe Dr. Abdul Razak, if you have anything to say to our audience. Anything?
Thank you so much for the great questions and also thank you so much for attending. It's been a pleasure.